I don't always hear, again, what I call the service sector, those folks who are either AmeriCorps members or members of service learning programs, talking mainly about young members of our community who are just defining their stances on what we can do to address the community issues we have. And I don't always hear the service sector really viewed as an integral engine or mechanism of change in these type of conversations. But I do want to say that every year Public Allies Milwaukee has allies placed with economic development corporations and grassroots neighborhood-based organizations. And every year we have about 35 individuals who are going through a 10-month program that facilitates the collaborative conversations among those different types of organizations that are working on these issues. So further, this is like a federal funding source that can come into our community to create real change. And one of the main limitations is how many of the organizations in this room are going to engage with this next generation of leaders to help connect the grassroots and the grass tops, to help have real conversations about race, gender, class, and ability, and how many organizations are going to help us to develop and retain the indigenous talent that we do have in our neighborhoods in Milwaukee. So I guess my question is, what do any of you see as the role of this emerging and growing service sector in addressing the challenges that we face in Milwaukee?
Gary?
It is very important that we grow young, bright talent, and the things that Public Allies is doing is tremendous. There's a tenant that just moved into our area over there called Admission Possible. 29 AmeriCorps kids that are in town working with seniors in high school to get into college and MPS. Public Allies, that group. There's 4 or 5 groups out there that are very important, that when a neighborhood planning process starts, they ought to be at the table because they can help you tremendously. And also, just to the question I think Margaret asked about the press, we talk about the 10 o'clock news and the printed press. Look at social media. My God, look at online stuff. That's what the young people are watching right now and following. Get the creative council involved in your, and forget the damn papers and the 10 o'clock news. I mean, excuse me, Mike. I mean, you got people that want to watch or listen to Mark Belling listen at that stuff, and they're not interested in in what's happening in the neighborhoods. So concentrate on that. That's the audience you're going to reach with these younger people. These people have to help drive the neighborhoods out of where they're at right now.
Joy, did you want to add something?
Yeah, well, one, I want to say thank you for your service to this community. I think that it's one of the brighter aspects, I think, of this whole community's future is the number of young people I see coming into the community or returning to the community, often in service areas like City Year or Public Allies. But there's also some organic things going on. I don't know if people here have heard of Art Milwaukee. Has anybody gone to any of their events? So a couple of people have. They're a really interesting little group that gets together and they have these big events, and there always is beer involved, which I think helps. But they're an arts advocacy group, and they had an event at Grand Avenue Mall October 6th. 1,600 people showed up at the mall that night, and there was art going on everywhere. And it's that type of organic approach that I think you really build community change about. What I like about them is that they're not waiting for somebody to bless them or give them permission. They just go and do it. And they're all about placemaking. And so I think the more opportunity we have for that type of service, that type of interest, that type of commitment, the stronger our community is going to be in the future. So again, thank you.
Let's take another question. I go back over to the side of the room. Yeah, there's a microphone there. Go ahead, please.
To take the conversation back to jobs, we have a situation on the northwest side where we have vacant industrial properties that the feedback that I'm hearing from real estate professionals is that the industrial properties no longer fit the need of today's manufacturer. So I'm asking for 2 insights. One, how can public agencies such as ours and municipality work to bring those private buildings to a point where they can actually function in today's industrial needs? And the second is, which we've all talked about, is the mismatch of skills within the vocational education arena, and what are your insights on how we work on that issue and bringing the image of the vocational trades back, and how do we fix our buildings so that we can actually attract new industry in my case specifically the far northwest side.
Let me take the second one first. Yesterday I had a meeting with the president of MATC, the head of Wisconsin Workforce Development, Wisconsin Workforce Development Group, and Don Sykes, who heads our Milwaukee Area Workforce Investment Board. And we talked about the need for us to work together. And the reason we did is I hear the same things you're hearing, that this huge mismatch of jobs and talent. And MATC gets blamed for it, the Milwaukee Area Workforce Investment Board gets blamed for it, the training programs that labor supports get blamed for it, and the city gets blamed for it. And I said, we just can't allow that to happen. We have to address this issue. And again, this meeting was less than 24 hours ago because I'm hearing, and I've heard it for some time, and what I want to do is have us come together with a plan, because we have 48 companies that are projecting that they're going to hire 310 people next year. I want those people to be from Milwaukee. And so I'm as tired of it as you are. And I said, let's just do it. Let's just come up with a plan and say, we've got the people here to do it. Because it is frustrating. It's very frustrating. And I hear it on the northwest part of the city, where I have employers who say they can't find the workers. In terms of the property, it is a city that's changing. And it is not 1965, and it's not even 1985 or 1995. And we continuously reevaluate what we should be doing with property. And do we wait? Is it waiting for Godot to hope that at some point someone's going to come back with a manufacturing concern? And there are parts of the city, and the northwest side is an example, where our hope has been that as manufacturing returns, it'll come there. Century City, the area, the old A.O. Smith site, is an area where we are moving forward now with TIF investments, with a lot of investment, to try to have that be somewhat analogous to what we did in the Valley. So I recognize that this isn't 30 years ago and that we have to be more nimble. But I think an example of where it has worked is the Valley. Because I can tell you when I came in, I was told, all right, this is going to cost $20 million. Well, it didn't take me more than 2 months to realize that was way, way less than it was going to cost. And we invested many, many tens of millions of dollars more into the Valley to make it work. And so this goes back to the issue of how much you can invest. There will be places in the city where we are going to look to invest to make it more palatable. But it's always situation-based, because you're dealing with a real company. How can we make it work? That's about all I can tell you right now.
Let me take a couple of other questions. Yes.
I still would like to have or hear some response about the undercurrent that we've heard in both presentations around race relations in Milwaukee. And I think that it is an issue, and I think that it hasn't come together in terms of that we're more cohesive. We're not. So I guess I'm interested in hearing from the panel this issue around racism and what the thoughts are, because I think that it's a huge problem in Milwaukee, and we've got to figure out a way to resolve it.
As Chris pointed out, that came up repeatedly in focus groups. Anybody want to offer a couple of thoughts? Nelson, please.
I think it's a huge opportunity, not a huge problem. I will start with that. I think that we all need to take responsibility for the issue, and to address everything that has been thought or taught about branding. Branding is a perception. I get a perception through ways. I get a perception through experience, or because somebody told me a story. My neighbor told me that restaurant is bad, so I'm not going to go there. So we had the power, as Sharon stated, to create our own story. We need to recognize, as it was said before, that many of the millennials have different values of the baby boomers. And there are going to be as many millennials and many baby boomers in a few years. And they think differently. They have a value system that Generation X taught them to be inclusive. They all know who Shakira is. They all know who Beyonce is. They all know what mango salsa is. So there is a unity that is growing, and we need to leverage that sector. We cannot ignore the power and the change that had happened through social media and our ability to create our own news. We have built a brand that is nationally recognized out of 6 and National through social media. I was in national TV 2 weeks ago, And it wasn't because I cannot get hung up on something that happened 7 years ago. I need to move forward from what is happening now. So I think when we start looking at people for the value that they add and stop thinking or branding individuals, I think we can move ahead. And then we need to tell our story very loud and clear of the value that each one of us contribute, despite of race, gender, age, or whatever it is.
Anybody else have something? Rob?
Just if I could make a comment probably from longevity and being in the construction business. I see a construction business today that's opening their arms to people of all color, gender, and everything else like that. When I started out 40 years ago, it was a white man's business. All Northern Europeans controlled it, master plumbers, apprentice plumbers. That doesn't happen anymore. I think that time is on your side and our side. I agree with you totally. I have a son who's 32. I have a son who's 46. There is no color disparity when they look at their friends. The problem is some of the business leaders, and they're evaporating, are on the other end on top. And I mentioned a radio commentator before. There's always that fermenting going on to that group of people. It's going to be there, but they're going to be a smaller part of our population as we go on. It's all about jobs. Put people to work, and that'll evaporate.
Rob.
And just quickly, on the race issue, it's not just anecdotal that there's some promise of things getting better based on the views of the younger generations. We've done some extensive survey work on race relations in the area and consistently have found that the younger the demographic, the more openness on a variety of different questions regarding race. So some glimmer of hope. I guess the other point that I wanted to make is, we talk about a race issue in Milwaukee, and I think we're really talking about greater Milwaukee. Not that the city of Milwaukee does not have racial issues, but I think what we're really talking about is our region, and we haven't talked much yet, nor do I think we want to get into it, but despite efforts like the M7, we still have a very, very big issue here in terms of our regional approaches to things and the very sharp differences of opinion on virtually all political issues between the city and particularly the suburbs from other counties. So I think when we talk about race, part of it is trying to address some of those issues of continued regional strife as well.
Sharon, you wanted to weigh in?
I'm breathing. I'm in so much agreement with this being a solution-driven process and this co-creation. But if I imagine that if you're sitting in my seat and I'm looking at the portraits of the leaders around this particular room, what do I see? If I look at my neighborhood, it is one of the most segregated communities. And is it segregated by choice or condition or a combination? So I do believe in a solution-driven approach, but I think we have to be so intentional, and that's why it goes back to both policy and relationships. We can't ice over this as if 40 years, 50 years, a lifetime doesn't matter today. And we have a tremendous responsibility for ensuring that our lives are inclusive. Look at our housing. What happens when children only find quality or believe that they find quality in going to communities that don't look like them? There is something so bizarre and destructive about that. I live in a community that Walnut Way bought a parking lot for $100,000. And the owner matter-of-factly said, that's been a parking lot since 1976. Many of the young people in my community were born after 1976. For me, that was the location of a swimming pool and a library. Right, Steve? So race matters just like place matters. And while I'm so wanting us to be solution-driven, I think we have to be bold enough and courageous enough to say, let's tackle this. Let's tackle this in a way where we imagine portraits in this room that are of every culture showing leadership. That we imagine that when we talk about places of power and developers, that we imagine and make sure that African Americans, Latinos, Hispanics, and all of us are part of it. And if we don't intentionally work to that, we'll get sidetracked. And I am very hopeful that we will.
Mayor.
Well, I agree with you that it remains an issue. It's a huge issue. And it's an issue within the city, but I agree with Rob. I think we have to look at greater Milwaukee when we talk about this as well. Because quite honestly, the disparities and the attitudes are much different outside of this city than are predominant within the city. And I think back several years ago where we negotiated a deal to sell water to New Berlin. And I did it because I wanted to act regionally. I wanted to be a good neighbor. And I was appalled when I saw the racial attacks that came as a result of an attempt to have affordable housing in New Berlin. And there were a lot of people that didn't even bother to hide it. It was very racially motivated by a good number of people. And the local leaders played right into their hands. And so I can't sit here and say that it's not an issue. It is an issue. And it's our responsibility to face it and deal with it head on. Because if we have a community, whether it's a city or a county or a region, where we are racially divided, it's just not going to work. It's not going to work. And so what I've tried to do, what the city's tried to do is to be as inclusive as possible. And are we perfect? No, we're not perfect. But this morning I came from a symposium on having better sales efforts to minority businesses in this city. So, and I said to them, I want everybody in this city to succeed. Again, that's in my best interest. When I'm thinking selfishly, it's when everybody succeeds. And I think we have to all work together to reach that goal.
Julia Taylor, I have a final word here, and then we'll break for lunch.
Yeah, and I would say, too, that, you know, it's always been a significant issue here. It still is. And I try to figure out what is the magic in terms of creating a different environment. And a big part of what I run into is when you talk to CEOs that have diversified their workforce and they brought talent in or they've tried to retain talent here, they don't stay. They stay 2 or 3 years and they leave. And you say, why aren't you staying? Well, they don't feel like they feel included. They don't feel like they can break into different social settings or into sometimes even volunteer activity. And so I think there are some significant things there we have to work on, and the stories too. A friend of mine from Cleveland one time talked about how that community really worked on changing its story to its young people, because Cleveland has been through some real rough spots. And the story that was being told to young people is, don't stay here. You don't have a future here. When we have that story going out there time and time again, it's self-fulfilling prophecy. So it was concerning to me again to hear, parents telling young people of talent, don't stay here, you won't have a future. It's guaranteeing them that this city won't have a future. Because I think a big part of it is collective mass, is getting enough young people here that we then have a responsibility to plug into positions of authority and positions of change, that they feel that they're really a part of the community, and it's all of our responsibility to do that.
We're going to wrap things up this part of the program right now. I would like to say thank you again to our panel today, Julia Taylor, Rob Aiken, Chair Barrett, Chair Downs, Chair Grant, and Nelson Stoller.
And I want to thank Mike Goucher again for moderating our discussion this morning. It was obviously a lot of energy and a lot of passion, and I think that bodes well for our future. I also want to emphasize that what we're doing today is not a program, and it's not a start of a new initiative. It's, as Chris said, it's a process. It's the start of a process about building trust, about better aligning our goals, about better telling our story, as we talked about.